Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, United States, Aum Shinrikyo in Japan, Unification Church in South Korea. These are names you may have heard before. All are examples of cults, that is, religious groups founded around a charismatic leader who exercises suffocating control over their members, requiring blind devotion. And one that doesn't get as much attention is the Great White Brotherhood, YUSMALOS, which popped up in the early 90s Ukraine. This is the story of the cult around Maria Devi Christos, who claims to be a living goddess.
Забыли о существовании совершенно иного мира, светового царствия, блаженства и жизни вечной. Впервые, когда Иисус явился, Он этот мир открыл для избранных. Но Он протоптал этот путь, Он прошел этим путем. Но сегодня эта дорожка, она как бы опять запылилась, не видно христовых следов. И вот чтобы опять этот путь расчистить, и свершилось пришествие Духа во Матери Человеческой. И я этим путем указываю этот путь. Более того, я открываю этот неизведанный мир для человечества.
The story begins with Yuri Krivonogov, born in 1941 in a small village in Russia's Voronezh province. Krivonogov had an interest in cybernetics, which is, in the words of its intellectual founder Norbert Wiener, the science of control and communications in the animal and machine. In other words, it's the study of control systems such as the human nervous system and the brain. In 1978, Krivonogov studied and wrote a PhD thesis at an institute in Ukraine, but never completed it. He did manage to find work in both Kiev and Novosibirsk in the fields of psychology and medicine. In his spare time, he took an interest in yoga, hypnosis, and ancient texts. Like a growing amount of people around his time and place, he sought out New Age spiritual movements. For a while, he was a Hare Krishna, but soon Krivonogov's relationship with the group soured. His peers in the Krishnas described Krivonogov as an authoritarian, and he soon clashed with the authority of group leadership. He then tried out another New Age movement called the Great White Brotherhood, and their beliefs were essentially mystical elements from a variety of Western and Eastern religions, and where certain enlightened masters who possess great knowledge are revered and are said to live multiple mortal lives, reincarnating after each death. He founded a soul institute called Atma, and this was the origin of the YUSMALOS cult. They published flyers and books about yoga, hypnosis, and spirituality. Naturally, as someone with authoritarian tendencies and a belief in a hierarchy of reincarnating super-intelligent beings, he began to ask, well, why not me? And claimed to be one of these reincarnating intelligent beings. And not just some random people lost to history, of course. He was St. John the Baptist, he was Tutankhamun, he was Noah of the Great Flood, among others. Krivonogov adopted a new name, Jan Swami. He started to give seminars all over Ukraine, and his audiences became bigger and bigger. Times were tough in post-Soviet countries in the 90s, and Krivonogov exploited this societal deterioration to preach his ideas. In 1990, at one of these seminars in the city of Dnipropetrovsk, now Dnipro, Krivonogov met an attractive 30-something-year-old woman named Marina Tsvigun. Tsvigun was born in 1960 in the city of Donetsk. She worked as a journalist and for the Communist Party youth organization Komsomol. Tsvigun was also possessed by the Spirit of God. She told Krivonogov an incredible story, that during a recent abortion operation she had actually died. Her soul, that of Marina Tsvigun, had gone to heaven, and God had come down and was living in her body now. Krivonogov was greatly impressed and attracted to her. He added her to his Atma movement and proclaimed her a living goddess, and himself a high priest. Tsvigun left her husband and son behind practically overnight, marrying Krivonogov not long after.
Иисус Христос воплотился в плоть женщин для того, чтобы дать вам свет.
Her last words to her then husband before leaving?
Я еду зарабатывать бабки.
I'm leaving to make some cash. Tsvigun changed her name to something that befit her status as a living goddess. Henceforth, she was to be called Maria Devi Christos. The middle name Devi means goddess in Sanskrit, and last name Christos means Christ in Russian. Tsvigun prophesied that she had 3 years to gather 144,000 followers before the end of the world, which was happening in November 1993. It's at this point we truly see the emergence of what was the Great White Brotherhood YUSMALOS. The funky word YUSMALOS was an abbreviation. Yus were Krivonogov, aka Yon Swami's initials. Ma was for Maria, Tsvigun's new official name. And Los was Logos, which is a title of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Krivonogov's existing capacity to publish was used by Tsvigun to put out mind-numbing amounts of poems, prayers, and other texts. Here's an excerpt from a prayer that she wrote for her followers to pray to her with. I am hypnotized by your heavenly lips. I am hypnotized by Jesus, my sadness. I am hypnotized by your soft hands, and in my heart is your sign. I am hypnotized by your infinite suffering. I am hypnotized by your green eyes. I am hypnotized by your cleanest of hands, and on my body is your sign. I wish I could say that it sounded better in the original Russian, but it's just as terrible.
Всеблаженная, всесущая, всеизвучающая.
In order to spread their message, members of YUSMALOS were encouraged to tear their karmic ties, abandoning friendships, marriages, children, family, job, school, and take on a nomadic and aesthetic way of life, ready to accept missionary duty to anywhere the organization deigned to send them. Members were encouraged to donate everything they had, houses, cars, money, valuables, to YUSMALOS. Since their past lives didn't matter anymore, neither did their possessions. The whole thing was organized as a fairly rigid hierarchy, with the holy couple at the top, their most trusted around them, and everyone else organized into groupings of 5 who were required to spy on each other and submit daily reports on the state of the soul of the rest of their 5. To keep things tight, an investigative group was formed called White Rose, which was to spy on members of YUSMALOS to ensure their loyalty. Anyone found to be deviant would be punished, and according to Krivonogov, require fixing with hypnosis and mental conditioning. Anyone struggling with their beliefs were known as rats and were treated worst of all. Members were forbidden to discuss any details of their lives before joining with each other, and weren't even allowed to use their real birth names. By 1992, Krivonogov began to steer the group to more conflict, to stir up social and religious strife, and to that end he instituted 2 new practices, kazlit, goating, and drakonit, dragoning, which both involved harassing other religious denominations, government officials, and anyone else with threats, abusive phone calls, letters, and libelous ads in newspapers. The group attempted to enter churches of other denominations and start brawls with congregations and clergy, and to try to hold their own sermons within. YUSMALOS members were often sent to these hostile assignments as a form of punishment.
Ну, конечно, если ты съедал там больше 2 ложек каши в день, то могли за это наказать. Или за то, что слишком долго разговаривать с человеком. Или задание не выполнил. Отправлялись в такие особо экстремальные места, проповедовать либо патриотам, либо казакам, либо в церковь православную. Ну, там, где могли реально жестоко избить.
Krivonogov also put in place protocols of behavior when dealing with police. Knights of the Living Goddess were to destroy their identification documents and begin a dry hunger strike, meaning not even water. Since arrest was considered a spiritual death, the intention of the hunger strike was to bring about a physical one. He literally began to promote suicide by starvation. A large amount of its members were very young, and in many cases underage. The state's prosecutor's office officially opened an investigation when many family and friends of people, often teenagers, came forward with disturbing stories.
Хочу достать такую литературу о Христе, там, о Боге, ну, в общем, о Христе. И начала ходить в церковь. Мама, погладь мне платочки. Я платочки поглажу. Она стала проповедовать, ходить, белую эту рясу себе отгладила, отстирала. Я женщинам из бригады, там они поехали в город, и посмотрите, они увидали. И говорят, когда мы увидали эту Люду, у нас было ужасное, неприятное ощущение. Но потом, когда я пришла и увидала там и ее, и вот такой мужчина был за 40 какой-то, Виктор, из Москвы приехал, вот он сюда ее, эту Веру приволок, первый. Я начала с ним ругаться. Ну, вы, если хотите своей дочери там добра, то пускай она здесь с нами остается, она у нас будет целее. Но потом уже где-то через месяц, уже 6 ноября полностью ушла, и все.
А вот ее вера, она как-то подействовала на ее характер? Характер изменился?
Знаете, она стала жестокой ко мне, как можно сказать. Ей все равно было. Я вот гипертоник, мне с сердцем ли плохо, ли хорошо ли. А я, вернее, ей все равно. Она говорит, ты знаешь, Мария, да и больше страдает, чем ты.
To avoid uncomfortable attention from this investigation, the holy couple of Krivonogov and Tsvigun disappeared, managing to flee Ukraine. Soon after, they secretly returned, settling down to living in their house in Kiev. Authorities either weren't aware or didn't care about them living under their noses. That is, until the couple annexed some of their neighbor's garden, erecting barbed wire around it. The neighbors called the police. It's theorized that Tsvigun annexed the neighbor's garden to get arrested. She wanted to play out the final phase of her prophetic journey, intending to mirror the path of Jesus of Nazareth, to be persecuted and to become a martyr. But it was clear that her delusions were being fed by her husband and her followers.
Нет Бога, кроме Бога. Имя Бога Мария Деви Христос. Запомните это все. Мои милые овцы в миру разбрелись, ибо пастырь в заклании.
While the group was already in some hot water with authorities and their behavior won them no favors with the people in and around Kiev, they were for the most part still able to operate not only in Kiev but all over Ukraine as well as all across Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. On November 10th, 1993, this, however, all changed. A few dozen YUSMALOS members, along with the group's leadership, the living goddess Tsvigun, the high priest Krivonogov, and the Pope Vitaly Kovalchuk, broke into the Cathedral of Holy Sofia. Hundreds more members gathered outside the church. Now, this was a big deal because Sofia Cathedral is one of the most famous landmarks in Kiev and is 1,000 years old. Its beautiful golden domes tower over the heart of Old Kiev. Holy Sophia, to whom the church was dedicated, is not an actual person. Sophia refers to holy wisdom, the feminine life energy of God. The group's plan in the cathedral was to hold their own ceremony there, and then to burn it and themselves to the ground. It was going to be quite the party. Some members came prepared with condoms. One cult member brought a gun to the event, and his job was to shoot the living goddess Tsvigun. She was aware of this. She was supposed to die. In fact, the only one that was supposed to survive the event was the high priest Krivonogov. He had heard there were catacombs under the church, which he could use to escape when the flames were burning and Tsvigun was already dead. He was to give a signal, to kiss Tsvigun's dress, at which point the man with the gun was to shoot her. Krivonogov did give the signal, but Tsvigun was not shot because the would-be shooter lost his nerve. The Berkut unit, a special response police backed up by police regulars and heavy equipment, soon arrived at the scene to dislodge YUSMALOS from the building. The police were certainly not shy in smacking the members of the cult around, and the cult members in turn claimed that they were persecuted and unlawfully detained for their beliefs, but the police did manage to remove and detain them.
врага еще при этой жизни. В другой тебе даровано будь это верный, зоркой глаз, живи себе нормальненько. Есть повод веселиться, ведь может быть в начальника душа твоя вселится. Пускай живешь ты дворником, родишься вновь прорабом, а после из прораба и до министра дорастешь. Но если туп как дерево, родишься баобабом и будешь баобабом 1000 лет, пока помрешь. Досадно попугаем жить, гадюкой с длинным веком. Не лучше ли при жизни быть приличным человеком? Да кто есть кто-то, кто был кем, мы никогда не знаем. Кто был никем, тот станет всем, задумайся о том. Быть может, тот облезлый кот был раньше негодяем, а этот милый человек был раньше добрым псом. Я от восторга прыгаю, я обхожу искусы, удобную религию придумали индусы.
Over 600 were detained and began a hunger strike, just as cult leaders instructed. Those not arrested also declared a hunger strike.
Господь сказал, когда я приду, будет голод, катаклизмы, мор будет. Говорят, это все. Но самое главное, как вы узнаете, что пришел я? Это то, что гонимы вы будете за Слово Божье.
За новое имя.
За мое имя новое. Никого не гонят сейчас, кроме Великого Белого Братства, живой церкви, живого Бога.
Но у вас же есть родители, они же беспокоятся, где вы находитесь.
Родители, всех, кто хочет увидеть,
все, кто хотят нас увидеть, пускай приезжают 1
То есть мы можем такую информацию дать?
Ради Бога. Смысл в том, что мы не можем взять палку в руки. Мы не можем ничего сделать. Мы защититься не можем, понимаете? Мы защититься можем только словом или голодовкой. Вы понимаете? Только этим. Вот и все. И защита наша – это Господь, Мария, Деви, Христос. Все, это наша защита. Поэтому мы свой протест можем выразить только таким образом.
The senior leadership of YUSMALOS, including High Priest Krivonogov, Living God Tsvigun, and Pope Kovalchuk, were all put on trial. When asked about the whereabouts of the loads of money belonging to the organization, Tsvigun refused to say anything because, quote, money is worldly. The charges included unlawful occupation of government or public property, endangerment of people's well-being, and intentionally inflicting bodily harm. State prosecutor heading the case, Viktor Shokin, said, after the arrest, Krivonogov and Tsvigun began a hunger strike. For 7 days, they consumed nothing. On day 8, I was able to convince Tsvigun to drink some honey from my hand. She apparently decided that I was under her influence, and so she trusted me. I was able to talk her into canceling the hunger strike both for her and her followers. There were no deaths. So we arranged a press conference with Tsvigun, dressed in all white. She addressed her children where she gave them permission to eat. During the trial, relations between the married couple went sour as they attempted to sling blame at each other. Krivonogov claimed he was only following Tsvigun's orders, the classic Nuremberg defense. And to prove it, he pointed out that there was almost no cult documents whatsoever that bore his signature. However, State Prosecutor Shokin revealed that during the investigation, Krivonogov had admitted to him that he married Tsvigun purely as a patsy to protect him from responsibility should anyone come asking uncomfortable questions. Tsvigun in turn declared her husband Judas Iscariot and the Antichrist, saying that she had nothing to do with any of the bad stuff. You are all under his spell. Why do you serve Satan, the devil? Did I make you go on hunger strike? Did I demand that you die in my name? It never happened. I don't know where the idea even came from. The devil put you up to it. State Prosecutor Shokin recalled the experience of the investigation. During the proceedings, they both behaved themselves decently and normally. In the long months of questioning them, I did not experience anything supernatural. They were just regular people. Tsvigun did, however, offer several times a trip to the astral plane. She held my shoulders with her hands, closed her eyes, and said, "We fly." In a few minutes, she would open her eyes and explain what she saw there. As for me, I never got to fly. In the end, Krivonogov was given 7 years in prison and Tsvigun 4. After prison, Krivonogov and Tsvigun divorced. Krivonogov married another woman and took her last name, Sylvester, likely to get away from his own infamy. He said, "I'm ashamed for the madness which I wrote. I want to live the rest of my life in peace." According to anti-cult activist Alexander Dworkin, however, a cult member told him that the former holy couple continued to meet in secret for some time after their divorce. Tsvigun attempted to keep YUSMALOS going. She softened some of the group's policies, including allowing members to love and communicate with their parents, and blaming all the bad stuff on ex-husband and alleged antichrist Krivonogov. She married again, this time her former pope from the old days, Vitaly Kovalchuk, and changed her name to World Mother El Moria. In 2005, she moved to Moscow and changed her name yet again to Viktoria Preobrazhenskaya, and there created the cosmic polyart of the third millennium, which she describes as a, quote, "a new direction in creativity, one that births a new cosmic world order, opens infinite knowledge, and pushes the boundary of the beautiful." She got her hands on a theater where she holds meetings, displays her art, and performs.
Святое царствие вступило в свою божественную власть любви святой благой.
During the Euromaidan in Ukraine in 2014, she tried to involve herself in politics by writing poems about the Kiev junta, which she said was a lizard people plot to destroy the ancient Rus, especially fixating on Ukrainian nationalist oligarch and politician Yulia Tymoshenko. She had also become an activist against vaccination, claiming that they are actually microchips for various nefarious purposes. There is one aspect of YUSMALOS that I've avoided discussing so far, and that's because it launches the story into a whole new dimension. It's best expressed by an article published in 1995 in the news outlet Izvestia by journalist Yanina Sokolovskaya. The title? White Brotherhood Prophet Worked for the KGB, and here's what it said. In the 1980s, Krivonogov would send his articles about methods of brainwashing to the Nikolaev office of the KGB to a doctor of psychology named Zhashkov. Within these works were descriptions of the Krivonogov concepts of the world and of biology, humans, society, families, and how to block the connections between them. Krivonogov would send his work to the branch of the KGB because he has a contract with them to do so. I would not have believed it if it wasn't for State Prosecutor Anna Milyun, who said the prosecutor's office was investigating this information in 1992. It involves the family of Dr. Zhashkov. He's a specialist in influence. But during the trial, this information was not presented. Clearly, a decision had been made not to rile the public up, because if these questions get asked, it would give rise to the next logical ones. How is it that Krivonogov's methods were put to use by official organizations? Was it thanks to their help that Krivonogov was able to organize seminars that started all of this? Did the KGB help create YUSMALOS? Of course, it's entirely possible. Krivonogov and Tsvigun were able to disappear out from under police attention during the investigations into the cult, crossing international borders and even secretly returning to Kiev. Where did Krivonogov get the money and connections to start appearing at expensive venues all around Ukraine for his seminars in the beginning? And where did they learn the brainwashing techniques if not the KGB? Well, evidence, however, is not so easy to find. Sokolovskaya's article mentions a Dr. Zhashkov who worked for the KGB. Since no first or middle name was given, I went on a little mission to try to find the man. I spoke to the journalist Sokolovskaya, but after 30 years, she could not recall his full name. I was able to track down a man named Artur Mikhailovich Zhashkov, who was a psychologist in the 80s and 90s based in Nikolaev, Ukraine. He was an expert in psychophysics, or the study of how physical stimulus can result in sensations and perceptions, but he is now dead. Sokolovskaya's article was echoed by the words of State Prosecutor Viktor Shokin, who said in an interview in 2021, "I believe that this was not just a criminal matter, but also a phenomenon which was organized by intelligence services at the time, because tens of thousands belonged to the group, not just in Ukraine, but in the Baltics, in Russia, outside of Ukraine, and the Soviet Union." But what bothers me here is the lack of quantifiable evidence. Both the journalist Yanina Sokolovskaya and the head prosecutor in charge of the case both claim an intelligence agency conspiracy. In 2015, Ukraine made public the records of the Ukrainian KGB, so it's possible there is information about this in their archives. However, due to the war, I am unable to visit there currently. But what we do have is a thorough analysis into how YUSMALOS was able to brainwash its members. And the methods are not anything special at all. In fact, they've been used by cults for centuries. Number one, they isolated their members from the outside world, including both social relationships but also media that those people might be consuming.
Родители одни в заблуждении.
Number two, sleep deprivation.
Максимум 2-3 часа спать в сутки.
Number three, the members did not have free time. Sleeping, eating, praying, or assignments for the cult, there was nothing else. Number four, the members were malnourished. Not only were they severely underfed, but also many nutritious foods were banned.
Минимум кушать, потому что вы же не взлетите.
And number five, constant physical work. This made members even more tired and malleable. And finally, the use of psychotropic drugs. This claim was never fully proven, but there is some evidence it occurred.
Однажды он случайно заметил, как старшие добавляют в воду для питья какие-то таблетки.
Вместе с этой едой, с этим всем давали, видимо, туда что-то подсыпали. Мы-то об этом не знали, это естественно.
The combination of these techniques, along with peer pressure and other factors, combined for a highly potent brainwashing program. As one participant in the Sofia Cathedral gathering put it, "Without any further effort, I marched to my death. I knew that I will die. I didn't think about my family or of those close to me. I didn't think of anyone. I just didn't care."
Мы пришли 1 ноября встретиться с Господом Марии Деи Христос. Где еще, в какой стране мира можно запретить с Богом встретиться? Мы пели на Крещатике, славили Бога. Нас схватили, бросили в машины. Так фашисты не поступают ни в одной стране.
Of course, Krivonogov himself denies any involvement with the KGB. In a rare 2021 interview at his home in a tiny village, he was asked if he studied mind control. "Rubbish. I never studied anything like that. Of course, like any educated person, I did read about it here and there. I never used anything like that. I never even needed to. People believed us because it was written in their hearts that they were celestial people. No matter how much convincing I do, you will not be a white brother, even if you believe me, because to be one, you have to be from another planet, a YUSMALOSian." Of course, Krivonogov hardly makes a very credible witness. His two ex-wives before Tsvigun describe him as a charlatan who made up extravagant stories to woo them. When he was trying to get into Tsvigun's pants, he told her they were reincarnations of Romeo and Juliet. How could someone be a reincarnation of a fictional character from a Shakespeare play anyway? I'm not sure that's more of a testament to Krivonogov's ridiculous tall tales or to Tsvigun's susceptibility to listening to them. YUSMALOS exists to this very day. Tsvigun removed Krivonogov from the organization, changing the meaning of the letters which stood for their names to now correspond to planets and stars. And as I mentioned earlier, Tsvigun continues her work as a living god, now in Moscow. She publishes her ramblings on the internet and appears to have found new sets of orbiters to praise and worship her. The branch of the cult in Dnipro built a park, complete with a series of handmade statues, and I think it's a perfect visualization of the cult's aesthetic. These statues, like the costumes, literature, and rituals, are almost comical, reminiscent of a campy theater production. Its ideology wasn't even unique or interesting, a clumsily connected series of stolen ideas and images from Christianity and Hinduism and ancient Egypt, with a sprinkling of a persecution complex for good measure. But we are left with questions. The possible involvement of the KGB in either assisting Krivonogov or setting up the cult or in running the entire operation have been long-standing unresolved aspects of the case. Were they involved? And if so, how much? And most importantly, if the KGB were involved, why would they do such a thing? Was it a test of a mind control technique? Was it a distraction, a training run for a psychological weapon to unleash on Soviet enemies? The techniques used by YUSMALOS are effective at brainwashing a small group of people who are in direct physical contact, but wouldn't work as well for application en masse. For example, can you imagine the difficulty of forcing the Soviet population of 290 million people into only sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night, or to make them abandon their family and friends? No question there would be interesting outcomes from such an experiment for the KGB. But my personal theory is that if they were involved at all, it was more in an informal role. Krivonogov worked under KGB psychologist Zhashkov for a time, and it's entirely possible that he made connections that he could have used for resources or a favor booking venues for his early seminars, for example. It's entirely possible Zhashkov or some other KGB stooge could have been keeping an eye on the growth of YUSMALOS and contacted Krivonogov with ideas to try out in exchange for cash or favors. But the possibility of this whole thing being a full-on planned KGB operation appears to me to be improbable. Well, what do you think? I would love to hear your opinion about this or anything else in the comments. If you like this video, it would mean a lot if you'd like or subscribe. It really helps a small-time content creator like me as I spend weeks researching, interviewing, writing, and editing, knowing that there are people who like watching these videos. If you want another kooky story from the post-Soviet space, check this one out. And above all, thank you very much for watching.